Good afternoon. It's Friday the 13th of December 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
The deal is done. The election results are in, and the People's Government has been formed. So this is an image from Boris's presentation this morning, just before he went to see the Queen, because he, of course, is off to form a new government. Now, we're going to be talking about a number of different things today. The result itself, of course, but also what is likely to be the policy agenda in the future and what's coming up in the next months and year or so. Patrick, the first question on our lips, I suppose, is how did he pull this off? And the question is, was there tactical voting involved?
Well, this was a big trending hashtag last night, and we saw a lot of late sort of surge in reports that voter turnout was going to be exceptionally high, and this would favor the Labour Party. The bookies were trending in that direction as well, and normally the bookies, a lot of people would say, Mike, are more accurate than the pollsters and closer to sort of real-time trends and analytics, but it didn't seem to pan out that way. It didn't seem to pan out that way, even though there was a rush to people to sell off their Tory seats in the betting market. It didn't pan out that way on the street.
And the turnout, in fact, was a little lower than in 2017. I think 1.5% down or so far. There's still one seat to report because it's a seat in Cornwall, because basically the weather was so bad that they couldn't get the ballot boxes from the Isles of Scilly. So there's still one seat to deal with. But let's just briefly have a look at, this was what we showed on Monday's programme with the latest poll results, and as you could see, the proposal was 339 seats to the Tories, 231 to Labour. Now,
that was Monday.
Sorry, no, that was Wednesday.
Oh, that was Wednesday. Okay.
So this was just the day before the vote itself. In fact, let's look at how it turned out. Well, they weren't completely wrong this time. So far, Boris has 364 seats, still one seat to declare, 203 to Labour, 11 to Liberal Democrat. The SNP did spectacularly well in Scotland with 48 seats. The DUP, we'll come on to that in a second. The DUP ended up losing two seats, so they have 8. And so it's quite an interesting situation building, because Boris, in his presentation, when he was given that speech, the People's Government speech this morning, was saying, of course, one nation, heading into Brexit now, one nation. And the question is it one nation? Because with that result in Scotland, 48 SNP seats, 6 Conservatives, 4 Liberal Democrats, 1 Labour seat. The SNP clearly well in the lead there. Although Indy Ref 2 wasn't a particular subject in the election campaign, that's clearly where Nicola Sturgeon is going to go with it. In Northern Ireland then, 8 DUP, 8 Sinn Féin and 1 Alliance Party seat. That's the result. So this is the first time in history that the Unionist side has not been a majority, certainly with parliamentary seats. So the question is this Northern Irish result a Brexit result or not? It's difficult to say. In Northern Ireland, it's a very special case, and people traditionally tend to vote absolutely along sort of party political lines, depending on which side of the divide in Northern Ireland you are. But of course, the same could be said for Labour Party voters, and they voted for Tories clearly this time. So it remains to be seen whether that's a direction of travel which is going to continue in the future, or whether that is an aberration just as a result of the Brexit protest vote. Because of course in Northern Ireland, a lot of people much more on the Remain side, whereas the DUP was showing itself as a Brexit party.
What it shows is those two issues are smoldering beneath the surface, and those are on the sort of the fringes there of the United Kingdom, but not fringes, but the outer realm from England.
Right.
That in Scotland and Northern Ireland there are burning issues under the surface that will possibly very sooner than later come up and rear their head.
Absolutely.
So let's. How's the post-mortem look, and how did this come about? How did this incredible election result come about?
Well,
Mike?
of course, that is a good question, and we've got to really highlight the fact that the Conservative Party has put a lot of effort in the last lot of years into dealing with analytics, and they have really handled this as an issue that they want to take control of. So this is Lord Ashcroft on the Conservative Home website, and he has a website called lordashcroftpolls.com. And he runs polls and he runs analytics, gathers up analytics and so on. And this is what the stuff that he's presenting publicly. But this isn't a fraction of what they have available to them in CCHQ and Conservative Party Central Headquarters. So Ashcroft provides a lot of analytics information, and they gather analytics information from other people, and they're absolutely have been following this campaign as it's gone. And as a result, Patrick, it has to be said that Boris has played a relatively low profile. I mean, we called this election campaign a dull election campaign, and Boris has played it quite low profile. He refused to appear on a couple of the debate programs. He refused to appear with Andrew Neil on the BBC.
And that did hurt him temporarily in terms of that Labour shortening that gap in the week run up to the elections. But it didn't, in the long run, Labour didn't have the ground game.
No, because I believe what they've been doing is they've been watching very closely people's reaction to this. How effective was the Labour Party at getting the other non-Brexit issues traction? And they did get some traction, but not as much as the Labour Party hoped, clearly. And so these guys have been watching this very carefully, and they've basically given Boris as little opportunity to make one of his Boris gaffes as possible.
So in the background, you have this incredible real-time analytics operation, statistical operation being run by the Conservative Party, Mike, that you think this is more reliable and more accurate and more precise than old school traditional polling?
Well, it is because they're using social media to gather those analytics, and so it's very much more real-time and very much broader demographic scope than is possible with the traditional polling system. But of course, we've also got the impact of this guy. This is the Australian here, British election, top Tories laud Australian strategist Isaac Levito after landslide win. And well, who is he? Well, he, of course, is a protege of Lynton Crosby. Now, Lynton Crosby ran the 2015 David Cameron campaign. That resulted in a result for David Cameron with a proper majority. Lynton Crosby was also involved in the 2017 Theresa May campaign, which is a complete failure. And Lynton Crosby was blamed for that failure. But of course, there was more to that than met the eye, because he was offering advice and there were arguments between Theresa May's team and him. So perhaps his strategy wasn't followed as it should have been. Nonetheless, he was in control, along with Dominic Cummings, of this particular election campaign, and the Lynton Crosby techniques have been applied once again.
So on the surface, it looked like bumbling Boris, locked in the fridge, running away from interviews, fleeing Andrew Neil, and that was the surface narrative. Below that, they had very carefully managed campaign.
Absolutely.
They did not expend any energy that they didn't need to in any areas.
And they just allowed Jeremy Corbyn to kill himself, really, with respect to the result, yes.
And this is the narrative that you're not going to read about. It's not going to be the popular narrative, which we'll get onto later.
No, indeed, but there are, I mean, it is, for example, in the Australian, but also in some of the British mainstream press as well, we have seen articles about this guy and what he has done. It's not going to get much traction, much broad traction, but the media has covered it to some degree, yes. But in the meantime, of course, well, what happens to poor old Jeremy? Here he is. When he was giving a speech after the results yesterday, said, "I want to also make it clear I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign." But he said that he would be leading the party while they discuss the future. So he said the Labour Party needs to look to the future. What will their policies be, and have a period of reflection about this election. So he's not going today, apparently, at this point. Now, whether this turns into I'm not resigning, I'm not resigning, I'm not resigning, I resign within 2 or 3 days, that remains to be seen, because it's fairly clear already that the Labour Party is going to be at war with itself very quickly.
They're already talking about, the first headlines that popped up this morning were Labour Party leadership challengers staking their sort of claim, and the names are already being thrown around: Jess Phillips, Keir Starmer, Hilary Benn, Diane Abbott, and so forth. So there will be a race. John McDonnell will be in the hunt there for sure. So there will be some internal party strife over this leadership issue. I predict it's not going to end with Corbyn, because Corbyn represents the voters. He represents the Labour voters and a lot of young people, a broad-based support. And so those people support Corbyn's policies. That's one of the main reasons why they support him. So replacing him with a Blairite, that's not going to be an easy trick, unless Labour is going to be looking at a real existential crisis, for a generational crisis potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So Corbyn's excuse for everything that happened was that this was really a Brexit protest vote. There's a certain amount of truth to that, and it has to be said that he has to bear personal responsibility for that Brexit protest vote, because, of course, up until about a year, 18 months ago, he was at least saying that the Labour Party would respect the will of the people in the referendum in 2016.
Up until 9 months ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And suddenly, well, for whatever reason, we can discuss what those reasons might have been. He did a 180-degree turn, and, well, he tried to then placate the Remain faction within the parliamentary Labour Party. So on one side, he had hundreds of thousands, millions of people that were supportive of him out in the country, and 200 people in the House of Commons that were absolutely against him and trying to fight him every step of the way. And suddenly he decided that those were the people that he needed to be appealing to for support, rather than the electorate. It seems like a strange decision. The question is why? Do you think it was 100% the pressure that came on him over the anti-Semitism?
That was part of it. What the anti-Semitism ploy did, this smear campaign, it backed Corbyn into a corner. So think if this was a boxing match, those were the body blows and the jabs. Anti-Semitism, and also you're a national security threat. That came later. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yes.
But then that set it up for the major right hook, which was, Jeremy, are you going to change your policy on Brexit? And you have to come into line. Otherwise, we're just going to wipe you out. And so he made a tactical decision, an intra-party decision to alter, to pivot, a 90-degree pivot, to go from we're going to execute the people's will of the referendum and get the best deal possible to we want a second referendum, effectively making Labour a Remain vote. And although they didn't say explicitly Remain was their policy like the Liberal Democrats did, when I was in London yesterday, looking at the campaign flyers in Kensington, Chelsea, the local MP there was campaigning as a Remain candidate on their posters, on their flyers, very overtly. And so that tells me that there was a lot of Labour people canvassing on the Remain issue. So that of course that works in London, but I don't know how that's definitely not played out well for Labour in
the north.
In the north, yeah.
Absolutely. And we showed this on Monday's programme, but it's worth just looking at it again. This was the poll, the latest polls on what the working class thinks. So this is the working class demographic. And of course, north of England, heavily represented in this demographic, 2015. And this is probably what you would normally expect to see. 29% Conservative, 36% Labour, big support for Labour in those constituencies and in that demographic. But in this election, the polls were showing 48% Conservative, 31% Labour. Really, this is an unprecedented situation, isn't it?
So this poll, you were looking at this poll, you were earlier in this week.
Right.
And this was really telling the whole story here. So, I saw a late trend on Labour, so I thought, looked at the bookies and looked at the panicking last night. I thought, well, maybe there'll be a surge with a high voter turnout. But the polls that you just showed there, that is the real sort of anchor of the analysis for this election.
Right.
And if they had such a lower working class representation, the Tories did in 2015, but still managed to put a government together, and if they're that much higher in this election, then clearly it was a fait accompli. There would be a conservative majority.
Absolutely. So now we come to the blame game, Patrick.
Well, this is the game that everybody is playing right now on social media. This is what's going to happen tomorrow, the day after, and the day after that, at least for the next 72 hours, 120 hours. We're going to be playing the blame game. And so this is the big question. Who do we blame for Jeremy Corbyn's loss or Labour's crushing defeat? And there's a lot of knives out at the moment, Mike. We're just going to go through some of the things that we're seeing in the press. So first up, most obvious candidate here, are the Russians to blame? We're already seeing this now, talking points saying that Russia is responsible for the demise of Jeremy Corbyn and the Remain campaign. And so one of the big parts of this particular conspiracy that we're seeing is that there's supposedly Russia has influence. It's buried in the Intelligence Committee report. So this is the report that Boris Johnson wouldn't release, and the reasons, because there's damning evidence of Russian influence in there, and of course that's the secret to the whole conspiracy. And if we can only see that report, we'll get to the bottom of this Russian meddling. So there's one. Here's the other one. Is Trump to blame? As we know, Trump insisted on a Boris-Farage election pact, although that sort of hit the wall early this week with all the Brexit Party defections, Mike.
Yeah.
So the idea that the Brexit Party itself as a party was going to play a major role in sort of taking a lot of Labour seats, that didn't actually pan out. So Trump tried, bumbled a bit, and then just kind of walked away. And so that was a typical Trump result there. And then, of course, this is one we're seeing a lot as well. Piers Morgan, the chat show host and news reader, former editor of the Daily Mirror, he's saying it's because of socialism, and this is a mandate that socialist policies are no longer popular. Okay, so let's see, which one of these is actually true? Well, it's definitely, I don't think it's this one, because who was the author of this Russian influence report? Well, it was Christopher Steele. And after the IG report this week released in the US, Christopher Steele is dead and buried in terms of being a credible source for anything. So I don't think they actually want to see this British Russian influence report, as we said before. Is it Trump? No, it's not Trump. Trump tried to meddle, and Trump had all intentions to meddle, but couldn't actually do any real meddling because Brexit had already taken care of those results. What about socialism? Is it still unpopular? Well, that's debatable. There are still tens of millions of people, millions of voters out there that do back the policies of Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto. So there's your answers there. So let's look at this aspect of it. I ran a straw poll here on Twitter. Which foreign power will the UK opposition activists and media blame first for their crushing election defeat? And of course, Russia is out ahead at 54%. This is with a small sample of 413 votes just in the last few hours. Israel is second, Trump is third, and the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance is coming in at fourth at 8%. So let's look at how this reflects. This is a little bit of some hints in this poll that I put here. Let's look at the actual blame. Okay, actual blame. So who really could you actually blame for the demise of Jeremy Corbyn? Well, the Blairites. Why? Well, they actually split the Labour Party successfully, and a sustained smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, the party leader. Second, the Israeli lobby. There's the Jewish labor movement, sustained smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. And the BBC and the media coming under heavy fire. There's Laura Kutzenberg there. She is the poster child of everything that's wrong with the BBC as of this week. And she's going to have a rough career ahead of her, at least for a while. Biased coverage favoring Boris Johnson. Absolutely, it was obvious. All sorts of games being played by the Beeb, and sustained smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, the BBC and the mainstream media. And then the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, sustained smear campaign against Corbyn. That was in all the major newspapers. They're quoting all these intelligence agents, operatives, former directors of department, etc., security experts. Everybody's saying that we can't have a Corbyn government because the U.S. will no longer share intelligence with us. Israel won't share intelligence with us, so it's a disaster. It'll be a national security nightmare if Corbyn is prime minister. So you can actually apportion blame to all four of these parties for the demise of Corbyn. But as we said before, Mike, that's not the full story. That only kind of warmed him up, weakened him, put him in a corner, and they were pummeling him, these various four parties which we've just shown. The real knockout punch, of course, was getting Corbyn to switch his position on Brexit.
Yeah, he really committed political suicide there, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Not as bad a political suicide as the Liberal Democrats. I would liken that to a kamikaze pilot going after an aircraft carrier. I don't know. It was a bad move by the Lib Dems. We'll get onto that later. But let's look a little closer here at this issue, and just to show you how real this was, okay? And then you had the Jewish Chronicle, all these various media outlets, Jewish media outlets. This was just Haaretz yesterday, Mike. Israel very troubled by Corbyn run in British elections, and they were riffing off the late poll surges and the voter turnout reports that were coming. And so this, you have to remember, this campaign against Corbyn from the Israeli lobby, from the Jewish special interest groups, this has been sustained more or less for 3 years, nonstop.
So the only country that hasn't interfered in Britain's election then is Russia, in fact?
Yeah, so far, Russia is absolutely vindicated thus far. I mean, the evidence shows clearly the U.S. tried, Israel has successfully meddled. The U.S. has successfully meddled through the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance.
Yes.
So let's go a little further here and see what else this story tells us. Well, it's the inevitable backlash, Mike. There are going to be backlash ramifications for this election. And here is the most obvious backlash. Right now, the BBC is at its weakest point, probably in its history. Because what they've done, they were caught, Laura Kutzenberg with her postal voting gag. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
Yesterday. I mean, incredible. So potentially illegal. And so clearly taking a side and being very smug about it.
Yes.
Okay, that is not going to go down well with the license fee paying public. Not only that, Boris Johnson even tabled a proposal, a very soft proposal to do away with the TV license fee. So it's not looking good for the BBC at the moment in general, but not for mainstream media as a whole. And so what's this mean? It's going to be a backlash, a loss in trust with the mainstream media. So that's a trend that's already moving in that direction. It's going to be accelerated now because of this election. Next is the Israel and Jewish lobby. There's going to be a backlash. This is predictable because people are going to wake up when they sober up after a weekend of getting hammered. All the labor supporters are going to be scratching their heads saying, what was all this anti-Semitism in the Labor Party malarkey about? Was there any truth to it? Is there any actual substance to those allegations? And like the masses will then look at this a little bit more closely because most people have avoided this issue, although a few activists have articulated this is a real problem. That's going to come back and hit that special interest group hard, I predict. So that will be a problem. So let's look at the last party in here, Mike. And this is potentially the most transformational backlash. This is traditional party politics in general, or it's going to accelerate the loss in public trust in traditional party politics, business as usual, representative democracy, the current form of government in Britain and so forth. That's accelerated by the disenchantment that you're going to have on the street from this election is unavoidable.
Okay, so keep that in mind when in 1 second we're going to talk about what happens next. But in the meantime, let's look at some of the winners and losers, Patrick. And here's a winner, or at least she was hoping to be a winner, because this was the election leaflet that was going out in South Devon. Jo Swinson's plans for Britain's future. This is probably the biggest scalp of the day. Oops. She was looking a bit sad when the result was announced last night. And so she has lost her seat. Of course, she is the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party. So that's two parties that now have to find new leaders in the coming weeks and months.
Leaderless parties. It all went a bit Pete Tong for Jo Swinson at some point. I think it was when her battle bus was unveiled. I don't know if you saw that debacle, but When you saw the way they're running their campaign, you knew that this was not going to work.
I think the biggest problem for Joe Swinson was having Guy Verhofstadt from the EU on the stage at the Liberal Democrat conference and the subsequent social media memes, because he made what was quite a serious speech talking about world empires and the need to compete with world empires, and really the only way to compete with world empires is to be a world empire yourself, and Britain needs to be in the European global empire in order to survive against China, Russia, India and the United States. Of course then the memes that came out on social media afterwards had her dressed up looking like Adolf Hitler, or at least an SS officer. And this did her a lot of damage, I think.
She brought the most extremist EU character to Britain to stump for her, basically.
Yes.
So an EU jihad, as some might call it.
Absolutely.
So this backfired horribly.
So what other winners and losers do we have, Patrick?
Well, let's look at little post-mortem here, and just also note I've asterisked some of these as well. Who are the winners? Obviously the Tory party, massive winner. Boris Johnson, massive winner. Brexit, massive winner. Out and out, those are the big winners from the election results last night. Next, I'm going to say, Mike, this is very important, the intelligence agencies, the security state, they are huge winners. Why? Because they managed to successfully leverage this campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. And so I think it has they've established themselves as being very effective in meddling in domestic politics. So Tony Blair is a winner. I tell you, he is ear-to-ear smiles right now as we speak, sitting in his villa in Marrakesh or wherever he is, sipping champagne, very chuffed with himself right now. He has managed to destroy the Labour Party, to divide it for the next 5 or 6, 7 years, put it into the wilderness in a worse state than the Conservatives were when William Hague was running the party. So Blair is very, very happy right now. Rupert Murdoch is extremely happy. This vile, toxic election campaign run by all of his news media titles has been a huge success, Mike. So Murdoch is very happy, and of course Tony and Murdoch are best friends. A lot of people don't know that. So Israel is extremely happy. They got the result they wanted, okay? So Trump is very happy. Why? Because Trump loves winners. And right now, Boris Johnson is a winner. So he is going to be the best friend of Trump. You're going to see a lot of photo ops. Boris will be in Washington more often. It'll look somewhat like Tony going there to establish himself in the court of George W. Bush. You'll see a similar love-in now going on between Trump and Boris Johnson. And also, the Scottish independence movement has got a huge shot of adrenaline from this election result. So you're going to see a lot more energy, a lot more calls for Scottish indie ref, and so forth. So the United Ireland issue, I put a question mark there, Mike, because it's not an immediate situation, but this election result could possibly build towards that sort of situation in the future.
Yes, it absolutely depends on whether that result is a Brexit result or whether it's something else going on, that's for sure.
Exactly. And this is a counterintuitive pick here. Extinction Rebellion is a huge winner. And people say, that doesn't make sense because the Tories and Boris Johnson won. And I'm going to say, yes, it does make sense. Because Boris Johnson and the Tories won, because Brexit won, this will fuel the membership and the interest in this quite extreme movement, Extinction Rebellion. This is going to fill their ranks with a lot of enthusiastic supporters. You're going to see them gluing themselves to trains and gluing themselves to asphalt and gluing themselves to lots of different things over the next few months. And this is going to dovetail perfectly with the reemergence of the Occupy movement. Get your paper out, write it down. We said it here today. Occupy is going to come big, and it's going to come probably in the next 12 months, perhaps, and it's going to be married with Extinction Rebellion. It's the same entity for all intents and purposes. So, who are the losers? The Remainers, Mike, are the losers. Are they? This is a question. We haven't made it yet past the finish line.
But in any case, define Brexit.
Yes.
So, is Brexit Brexit? That's another question.
So on the surface, let's say the Remainers are losers. Brussels, I think, potentially could be a big loser here. We'll see. Again, it refers back to the first point with the Remainers, whether there's a real Brexit or Brexit in name only. So the Labour Party is a massive loser. They have cannibalized. They've cannibalized their own party. Why? Really to get rid of a leader that is probably too left-wing for the establishment, too left-wing for and the allies of Britain, the United States, Israel, and so forth.
Do you think, just briefly, do you think that in 12 months' time the Labour Party will look back on this and say that it was a price worth paying to get rid of Corbyn?
Some will, but Mike, some won't. Some won't. I think in the long run, Labour, as we once knew it, is hugely damaged by what's happened in the last 9 months or the last couple of years, let's say. So let's just round off that list. Other losers here, Liberal Democrats. I think that's quite obvious there. They're going to have to rebuild. They're going to have a complete rethink, and they're going to start from zero. Are they lower, Mike, than when Nick Clegg signed the 11th hour deal with David Cameron? Are they lower? Well, they are lower because they don't have any cabinet seats. At least they got some seats out of the coalition with Cameron.
But that ended badly.
It did end badly, but Nick landed on his feet in Palo Alto. He's working for Facebook now. So the left working class, okay, I put an asterisk there, okay, because part of the working class feels that they won from this election. This is the Brexiteer working class. But there's also a left wing of the working class that feels like this was a crushing defeat. So that's why I put an asterisk there. So half of the working class, more than half of the working class, are going to find themselves behind the 8 ball. The poor, the underclass, the anti-austerity constituency, okay, the people that suffer from austerity, they're going to feel like they are massive losers from this election result. And you could see a wave of savage capitalism from the Tories, and they'll privatize anything they could get their hands on in the next 5 years. Wouldn't be surprised, okay? And then the Jewish lobby I think they might, I put an asterisk there, Mike, because they're probably declaring victory in the short term. But in the long term, as we said before, they might reap a huge backlash from the campaign to defame and slander Jeremy Corbyn. So that's why I put them in the losers category, because I think in the mid to long term they could come out as losers from this result. Even though they won, they got what they wanted in terms of an election result. Okay.
Well, the question then is, did Boris, has he ended up with a working majority? Now his majority, of course, is 47, with 1 seat still to return. So it may be 48, but will this be a working majority, and will he be able to achieve what he wants to achieve? He says Brexit will be done by January the 31st. The timetable is supposed to be something along the lines of that they will immediately bring the withdrawal bill back to the House of Commons as soon as there's a Queen's speech, which will happen within a day or two. And there is even talk of the House of Lords sitting between Christmas and New Year to try to get the withdrawal bill through in time for January. So is it going to be a working majority? That remains to be seen. But the question is, what else is going to be going on in British politics? Well, of course, even if the withdrawal bill becomes the Withdrawal Act and we leave on the 31st of January, that's only the beginning of the next stage of the process. Which, of course, is the future relationship. The future relationship is spelt out by the political declaration on the future relationship. That's the framework under which the negotiations are going to happen. And those negotiations are supposed to be done by the 31st of December 2020. There's going to be a trade deal as part of that. And, of course, many, many people believe that there's no possibility of that trade deal being complete by then. And the reason is because they assume that there's going to be some kind of divergence between UK laws and rules and regulations and EU laws, rules and regulations. But of course, there can be no divergence until that deal is done. And the reason there can be no divergence is because as soon as Britain and the EU start diverging, then that trade agreement becomes harder to achieve. So as time goes on, you end up moving away from your target rather than moving towards your target. So Britain and the EU have to stay in sync until that trade deal is done.
Which could be a couple of years, right?
Well, no, it's supposed to be done by the 31st of December. Many people are skeptical that it can be done by then. If it isn't done by then, that's the deadline, then that deadline can be extended for another 2 years. So we're right back into the same type of politics that we've seen in the last 3 years, with a deadline approaching, maybe no agreement on what the trade agreement is going to be or the future relationship is going to be, then extensions and extensions and extensions. So we're potentially looking at 3 years of this type of politics. It may be quite an unpleasant thing, but it doesn't end there, because, of course, when this gentleman, whose name escapes me at the moment.
This is John McDonnell.
John McDonnell, thank you very much. We're live, you know. He was giving his acceptance speech last night, and of course there was some disruption in the room, he immediately switched tack. Suddenly he was saying things along the lines of, there are fears now for the future of our democracy because of the rise of right-wing extremism. And I am going to suggest that we're going to see quite a bit more of the rise of right-wing extremism in the next 12 months. This is destabilizing. It's going to create chaos in the country. One of the things that struck me about the acceptance speeches that I saw on the television last night is that a lot of the candidates stood up and said, thank you very much to the police and the security services for keeping us safe all through this process. This is a narrative which is going to build in politics, that there's more and more danger in the country, and
we need a police state. To buttress our security and our safety. So that plays nicely, Mike, into what I was saying about the rise of left-wing angst, because the left and the radical left as well, the Extinction Rebellion, the climate strikers, and so forth. They're going to say that we have no voice in politics. Party politics, as we said, the disenchantment, the backlash, in all of those areas we said earlier. So they're going to say, we're disenfranchised. So what happens to people that are disenfranchised? They revolt. They protest. They demonstrate. They potentially vandalize or set fire to things. This happens in America. This happens in Europe. This happens everywhere. It happens in the UK as well. So that's going to also fuel right-wing, reactionary potentially street confrontations as well, because there's a EU, there's an immigration issue, there's racial issues in there that have been injected into this dynamic as well. So as the left wing, the right wing reaction, and everybody just keeps rising up, and it gets more intense. So who comes in to save the day when that happens? The police state.
Absolutely.
More snooping powers, more surveillance powers, more police powers. And I can see Boris getting up after everything goes to hell in the handbasket if Occupy goes wild, stands in front of the country, and we need to secure Britain and keep for businesses and trade and so forth. We need more money for the police services. We need more money for surveillance. We need more money for maybe to deploy gendarmerie on the streets of Britain and so forth. So it's a perfect storm for the security state and for the police state. Right, and
of course, the other thing that we discovered last night was Nigel Farage was speaking to Andrew Neil, and he announced that the Brexit Party could well be called the Reform Party in the not-too-distant future. Now, what role is this going to play? Well, really, what the Brexit Party has been doing for the last period of time, and UKIP before to some degree, of course, this comes back to the Tory party and their analytics and their demographics. And the Brexit Party pushes out policy areas that maybe are a little controversial, but of course the Brexit Party has some activism behind it. So this the policies get pushed out by the Brexit Party, and before you know it, the Tory party is watching very closely to see what kind of reaction that gets. It's safe for the Tory party because they don't get tired with pushing forward these types of policies. It's Farage that's out front doing that. So the Reform Party, what is he talking about? Well, he was talking very clearly during the general election campaign about constitutional reform. He was talking about replacing the House of Lords. He was talking about a written constitution, and he was talking about electoral reform. And of course, up until now, the smaller parties, when they speak about electoral reform, have been speaking about some kind of proportional representation system rather than first past the post. But actually, in line with what you've been talking about, with people being moved to the extremes, with Extinction Rebellion, perhaps some right-wing activism going on as well, much more likely is we're going to see the narrative build of the failure of representative democracy completely. We need participatory democracy, and we're going to see sortition, which is citizens' assemblies and these kinds of things. Now, you talk about Occupy. Of course, the first time we really saw an attempt to develop these types of citizens' assemblies was with the Occupy movement.
It was there.
And of course, if you have a citizens' assembly which is dealing with a subject like climate change or whatever it happens to be, EU defence, whatever it happens to be, who chooses the experts that come in to brief the citizens' assembly? And if you're in control of that choice of experts, and that choice of experts is coming from think tanks and NGOs.
Trained in the Delphi techniques, trained in NLP and so forth.
Absolutely. Then you can absolutely guarantee that you get the result out of those citizens' assemblies that you want.
You're not kidding.
So,
and that's proven. I've seen many a focus group, many a test on this exact thing. When you get a group of people, then you bring and then you poll them, and they say 60% against abortion, 40% for abortion. Then the experts come in, and the whole thing flips within an hour, and they poll them afterwards, and so forth. This is just one issue I've seen in America. So the gaming of this People's Assembly format, and a lot of people are complaining about this in Ireland, by the way. Because they have introduced some of this in the Republic of Ireland. It has gotten traction there, and I've already heard complaints that it seems to be a managed situation to get the results that whoever's behind the scenes wants. So I expect the same thing might happen. In Britain.
Absolutely, and of course the danger with it is that people think that because this is democracy, it's being presented as democracy brought to the most local level, that it's a good thing. But in fact, there's no accountability, and this is the problem. If you have a representative democracy that's even nearly working, we saw from this election what happens whenever the electorate doesn't like a decision you've made. Well, if it's the electorate themselves that are making the decision, it's very hard to have any kind of accountability there. So there's a lot to be considered with that. We had a couple of other things we were going to discuss that were not election related, but actually we're absolutely out of time, Patrick. So I think we'll leave it there for today. This has been a very interesting general election, and the result very interesting. We'll see what the repercussions are over the next few weeks and months. And we'll see what happens in the new year with Brexit without the exit. Thank you very much for joining me. And we will be back at the same time on Monday. Brian and I will be here, and we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.